I finished the whole book. I will be posting these on the channel that is just under my name. But I'm live streaming them here on this channel, since this is where I have the most reach. And right now everything's set up to be streaming on this channel, so I'll just upload to the other channel afterwards. And it'll still obviously be available on this channel for all of you to watch. I just have to make sure this is working first. Because it never saves my live broadcast titles. I did the same exact setup with my other mobile device, but for some reason the camera wouldn't show up. So I don't know. It's strange. Before we begin though, since I'm going to be talking a lot, can't have my lips decaying on stream. No pun intended. Okay. A masterpiece of the horror genre, Dracula also probes identity, sanity, and the dark corners of Victorian sexuality and desire. It begins when Jonathan Harker visits Transylvania to help Count Dracula purchase a London house and makes horrifying discoveries in his client's castle. Soon afterwards, disturbing incidents unfold in England. An unmanned ship is wrecked, strange puncture marks appear on a young woman's neck, a lunatic asylum inmate raves about the imminent arrival of his, quote, master, and a determined group of adversaries prepare to battle the Count. Dracula. Chapter 1. Jonathan Harker's journal, kept in shorthand. 3rd May Bistritz. Left Munich at 8:35 p.m. on the 1st of May, arriving at Vienna early next morning. Should have arrived at 6:46, but train was an hour late. Budapest seems a wonderful place, and the glimpse which I got of it from the train and the little I could walk through the streets. I feared to go very far from the station, as we had arrived late and would start as near the correct time as possible. The impression I had was that we were leaving the west and entering the east, the most western of splendid bridges over the Danube, which is here of noble width and depth, took us among the traditions of Turkish rule. We left in pretty good time. It came after nightfall to Klausenberg. Here I stopped for the night at the Hotel Royal. I had for dinner, or rather supper, a chicken done up some way with red pepper, which is very good, but thirsty. Mem, get recipe for Mina. I asked the waiter, and he said it was called paprika Hendel, and that, as it was a national dish, I should be able to get it anywhere along the Carpathians. I found my smattering of German very useful here. Indeed, I don't know how I should be able to get on without it. Having some time at my disposal when in London, I had visited the British Museum and made my search among the books and maps in the library regarding Transylvania. It had struck me that some foreknowledge of the country could hardly fail to have some importance in dealing with a noble of that country. I find that the district he named is in the extreme east of the country, just on the border of 3 states, Transylvania, Moldavia, and Bukovina, in the midst of the Carpathian mountains, one of the wildest and least known portions of Europe. I was not able to light on any map or work giving the exact locality of the castle Dracula, as there are no maps of this country as yet to compare with our own ordnance survey maps, but I found that Bistritz was the post town named by Count Dracula, is a fairly well-known place. I shall enter here some of my notes, as they may refresh my memory when I talk over my travels with Mina. In the population of Transylvania, there are 4 distinct nationalities: Saxons in the south, and mixed with them the Walish, who are the descendants of the Dacians, Magyars in the west, and Zekluls in the east and north. I am going among the latter, who claim to be descended from Attila and the Huns. This may be so, for when the Magyars conquered the country in the 11th century, they found the Huns settled in it. I read that every known superstition in the world is gathered into the horseshoe of the Carpathians, as if it were the center of some sort of imaginative whirlpool. If so, my stay may be very interesting. Mem, I must ask the Count all about them. I did not sleep well, though my bed was comfortable enough, for I had all sorts of queer dreams. There was a dog howling all night under my window, which may have had something to do with it, or it may have been the paprika, for I had to drink up all the water in my carafe and was still thirsty. Towards morning I slept and was wakened by the continuous knocking at my door, so I guess I must have been sleeping soundly then. I had for breakfast more paprika and a sort of porridge of maize flour, which they said was mamaliga, and eggplant stuffed with forcemeat, a very excellent dish which they called impletata. Mem, get recipe for this also. Every time I say mem, it's remember. It's just short for remember. I had to hurry breakfast, for the train started a little before 8, or rather, it ought to have done so, for after rushing to the station at 7:30, I had to sit in the carriage for more than an hour before we began to move. It seems to me that the further east you go, the more unpunctual are the trains. What ought they to be in China? All day long we seemed to dawdle through a country which was full of beauty of every kind. Sometimes we saw little towns or castles on the top of steep hills, such as we see in old missals. Sometimes we ran by rivers and streams, which seemed from the great wide stony margin on each side of them to be subject to great floods. It takes a lot of water and running strong to sweep the outside edge of a river clear. At every station there were groups of people, sometimes crowds, and in all sorts of attire. Some of them were just like the peasants at home, or those I saw coming through France and Germany, with short jackets and round hats, homemade trousers, but others were picturesque. The women looked pretty, except when you got near them, but they were very clumsy about the waist. They had all full white sleeves of some kind or other, and most of them had big belts, with a lot of strips of something fluttering from them like the dresses in a ballet. But of course, petticoats under them. The strangest figures we saw were the Slovaks, who were more barbarian than the rest, with their big cowboy hats, great baggy, dirty white trousers, white linen shirts, and enormous heavy leather belts, nearly a foot wide, all studded over with brass nails. They wore high boots with their trousers tucked into them, and had long black hair and heavy black mustaches. They are very picturesque, but do not look prepossessing. On the stage they would be set down at once as some old oriental band of brigands. They are, however, I am told, very harmless, and rather wanting in natural self-assertion. It was on the dark side of twilight when we got to Bistritz, which is a very interesting old place, being particularly on the frontier of the Borgo Pass, leads from it into Bukovina. It has had a very stormy existence, and it certainly shows marks of it. 50 years ago, a series of great fires took place, which made terrible havoc on 5 separate occasions. At the very beginning of the 17th century, it underwent a siege of 3 weeks and lost 13,000 people. The casualties of war, proper being assisted by famine and disease, Count Dracula had directed me to go to the Golden Krone Hotel, which I found to my great delight to be thoroughly old-fashioned, for of course I wanted to see all I could of the ways of the country. I was evidently expected, for when I got near the door I faced a cheery-looking elderly woman in the usual peasant dress, white undergarment with long double apron front and back of colored stuff fitting almost too tight for modesty. When I came close she bowed and said, "The Herr Englishman?" "Yes," I said, "Jonathan Harker." She smiled and gave some message to an elderly man in white shirt sleeves who had followed her to the door. He went but immediately returned with a letter. "My friend, welcome to the Carpathians. I am anxiously expecting you. Sleep well tonight. At 3 tomorrow the diligence will start for Bukovina. A place on it is kept for you. At the Borgo Pass," it might be Borgo, but I'm going to say Borgo. "Borgo Pass, my carriage will await you and will bring you to me. I trust that your journey from London has been a happy one, and that you will enjoy your stay in my beautiful land. Your friend, Dracula." 4 May. I found that my landlord had got a letter from the Count directing him to secure the best place on the coach for me, but on making inquiries as to the details he seemed somewhat reticent, and pretended that he could not understand my German. This cannot be true, because up to then he had understood it perfectly. At least, he had answered my questions exactly as if he did. He and his wife, the old lady who had received me, looked at each other in a frightened sort of way. He mumbled out that the money had been sent in a letter, and that was all he knew. When I asked him if he knew Count Dracula and could tell me anything of his castle, both he and his wife crossed themselves, and saying that they knew nothing at all, simply refused to speak further. It was so near the time of starting that I had no time to ask anyone else, for it was all very mysterious and not by any means comforting. Just before I was leaving, the old lady came up to my room and said in a very hysterical way, "Must you go, O young heir? Must you go?" She was in such an excited state that she seemed to have lost her grip of what German she knew. And mixed it all up with some other language, which I did not know at all. I was just about to follow her by asking many questions, but I told her that I must go at once, and that I was engaged on important business. She asked again, "Do you know what day it is?" I answered that it was the 4th of May. She shook her head as she said again, "Oh yes, I know that. But do you know what day it is?" On my saying that I did not understand, she went on, "It is the eve of St. George's Day. Do you not know that tonight, when the clock strikes midnight, all the evil things in the world will have full sway? Do you know where you are going, and what you are going to?" She was in such evident distress that I tried to comfort her, but without effect. Finally, she went down on her knees and implored me not to go, at least to wait a day or two before starting. It was all very ridiculous, but I did not feel comfortable. However, there was business to be done, and I could allow nothing to interfere with it. I therefore tried to raise her up and said as gravely as I could that I must go. She then rose and dried her eyes, and taking a crucifix from her neck offered it to me. I did not know what to do, for as an English churchman, I have been taught to regard such things as in some measures idolatrous, and yet it seemed so ungracious to refuse an old lady meaning so well and in such a state of mind. She saw, I suppose, the doubt in my face, for she put the rosary around my neck and said, "For your mother's sake," and went out of my room. I am writing up this part of the diary whilst I am waiting for the coach, which is, of course, late, and the crucifix is still around my neck. Whether it is the old lady's fear, or the many ghostly traditions of this place, or the crucifix itself, I do not know, but I am not feeling nearly as in my mind as usual. If this book should ever reach Mina before I do, let it bring my goodbye. Here comes the coach. 5th of May, the castle. The gray of the morning had passed, and the sun is high over the distant horizon, which seemed jagged, whether with trees or hills I know not, for it is so far off that big things and little are mixed. I am not sleepy, and as I am not to be called till I wake, naturally I write until sleep comes. There are many odd things to put down, and lest who reads them may fancy that I dined too well, I left me put down my dinner exactly, and I dined on what they call robber's steak, bits of bacon, onion, and beef seasoned with red pepper and strung on sticks and roasted over the fire in the simple style of the London cat's meat. The wine was golden Midiash, which produces a queer sting on the tongue, which is, however, not disagreeable. I had only a couple glasses of this and nothing else. When I got on the coach, the driver had not taken his seat, and I saw him taking with the landlady. They were evidently talking of me, for every now and then they looked at me, and some of the people who were sitting on the bench outside the door, which they call by a name meaning word bearer, came and listened and then looked at me, most of them pityingly. I could hear a lot of words often repeated, queer words, for there were many nationalities in the crowd, so I quietly got to my polyglot dictionary from my bag and looked them out. I must say they were not cheering to me, for amongst them were Ordog, Satan, Poko, Hell, Strigosha, Witch, and Vrolak, and Voksaslak, both of which mean the same thing, one being Slovak and the other Servian for something that is either werewolf or vampire. Remember, I must ask the Count about these superstitions. When we started, the crowd round the inn door, which had by this time swelled to a considerable size, all made the sign of the cross and pointed 2 fingers towards me. With some difficulty I got a fellow passenger to tell me what they meant. He would not answer at first, but on learning that I was English, this was not very pleasant for me. Just starting for an unknown place to meet an unknown man, but everyone seemed so kind-hearted and so sorrowful and so sympathetic that I could not be touched. I shall never forget the last glimpse which I had of the inn yard, and its crowd of picturesque figures all crossing themselves as they stood round the wide archway, with its background of rich foliage, of oleander and orange trees and green tubs clustered in the center of the yard. Then our driver, whose wide linen drawers covered the whole front of the box seat, Gutsa, they called them, cracked his big whip over his 4 small horses, which ran abreast, and we set off on our journey. I soon lost sight and recollection of ghostly fears, and the beauty of the scene as we drove along, although had I known the language, or rather languages, which my fellow passengers were speaking, I might not have been able to throw them off so easily. Before us lay a green sloping land full of forest and woods, with here and there steep hills crowned with clumps of trees or with farmhouses, the blank gable end to the road. There was everywhere a bewildering mass of fruit, blossom, apple, plum, pear, cherry, and as we drove by I could see the green grass under the green trees spangled with the fallen petals. In and out amongst those green hills of what they call here Mittelland ran the road, losing itself as it swept round the grassy curve or was shut out by the straggling ends of pine woods, which here and there ran down the hillside like tongues of flame. The road was ragged, but still we seemed to fly over it with a feverish haste. I could not understand then what the haste meant, but the driver was evidently bent on losing no time in reaching Borgo. I feel like it's Borgo. Pruned. I was told that this road is in summertime excellent, but that it has not yet been put in order after the winter snows. In this respect, it is different from the general rule of the roads in the Carpathians, for it is an old tradition that they are not to be kept into good order. Of the old hospodars would not repair them, lest the Turks should think they were preparing to bring foreign troops, and so hasten the war, which always really a loading point. Beyond the green swelling hills of the Mittel land rose mighty slopes of forest to the lofty steeps of the Carpathians themselves. Right and left of us they towered, with the afternoon sun falling full upon them, and bringing out all the glorious colors of this beautiful range. deep blue and purple in the shadows of the peaks. Green and brown were grass and rock mingled, and endless perspectives of jagged rock and pointed crags, till these themselves lost in the distance where the snowy peaks rose grandly. Here and there seemed mighty rifts in the mountains, through which, as the sun began to sink, we saw, now and again, the white gleam of falling water. One of my companions touched my arms as we swept round the base of the hill and opened up the lofty snow-covered peak of the mountain, which seemed, as we found while on our serpentine way, to be for us. "Look, Istin Zek God's seat." And he crossed himself reverently as we wound on our endless way, and the sun sank lower and lower behind us as the shadows of the evening began to creep around us. That'll do for now. If you guys would like me to continue reading, let me know, and I will do a second part, or I continue reading, and perhaps I will read a little bit longer. Just let me know. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed.